Have you ever watched a video and you just know in the back of your head that someone out there is watching it at the same time you are, and you can kind of feel their pain and tears, kind of like in Pacific Rim where you're sharing the neural load. Both of you are experiencing this disaster unfold in front of you, and you can kind of have this almost empath moment where you know there's someone crying behind the screen watching this too. Well, welcome to the everyday experience of being an Overwatch 2 fan. Every time there is a new announcement from the Overwatch development team, it's just bad news. It's getting visited by Krampus every few months when they make some kind of new details about what's going on with Overwatch. It's always just awful, disastrous news. And today's was by far their worst. They just completely announced that the last 4 years of hard work on their PvE component to Overwatch is just being scrapped. The entire progression system, all of that, just being flushed right down the shitter to join the gators in the sewers now, which is beyond shocking, because that's the entire purpose of Overwatch 2 existing, by the way. You might recall Overwatch 2 launched and there wasn't any of the story mode PvE components to it. They said that was coming in the future, and that's the entire reason why it's named Overwatch 2. Because right now the game is basically just Overwatch 1, but they had that big balance update. It was basically a big patch where they went from 6 to 5 for team comp. And of course, changes to heroes and their kits, pretty significant changes in some cases, all of which I appreciated, but at the end of the day, it was just Overwatch again. The whole point of it having a 2 in its name and being marketed as a sequel is that there was this promise, this little pinky promise that the PvE and story mode, the hero mode, all that, it was coming. It was, trademarked right around the corner, it's on its way. But unfortunately, just like the Season 2 Ultimate Muscle DVD I ordered from Amazon back in 2004, it's never showing up. Which begs the philosophical question that would have Socrates scratching at his noggin. What the fuck is Overwatch 2 then? Why is Overwatch 2? If the whole thing that was supposed to be the identity of this title, the PvE story mode, is no longer in it, then what makes Overwatch 2? We're getting real deep into the weeds here. We're about to start experiencing some fucking solipsism. But anyway, let me show you a segment from the announcement where they broke this hard-to-swallow pill to the community. It's fucking tragic.
And so we're left with another difficult choice. Do we continue to pour all that effort into PvE, hoping that we can land it at some point in the future? Or do we stick with this set of values that we've aligned on and focus on the live game and focus on serving all of you? With everything we've learned about what it takes to operate this game at the level that you deserve, it's clear that we can't deliver on that original vision for PvE that was shown in 2019. What that means is that we won't be delivering that dedicated hero mode with talent trees, that long-term power progression. Those things just aren't in our plans anymore. And we know that this is going to be disappointing to many of you, which is why we wanted to bring it up before we talked about the roadmap. And to be perfectly honest, it's been really difficult for many of us and a lot of folks on the team who've poured their heart and soul into that stuff.
This clip will live in infamy in the Overwatch community for quite some time, I imagine. This is going to be the boogeyman that haunts them for a long time. They shut down the copium of the PvE's right around the corner, guys, then everything's going to be great. The grass will be greener once the PvE and story mode's finally out. Just hang tight, buckle down, it's on its way. They just rip the band-aid off and say, nope, no reason to believe in magic. We're pulling all of the resources from it and focusing on the live game. Now, beyond the obvious of why this is horrible, it's important to note that Overwatch itself, Overwatch 2 itself, isn't the most cared for product right now. I wouldn't say it's neglected. There's a lot of members of the community that do complain about it being neglected from the team, but I disagree. It receives a balancing update, a patch at least once a month. So the frequency isn't terrible, but it doesn't have the same tender love and care you would expect from a title like this. And it has certainly been in a long-term drought when it comes to meaningful new content being added to it, like new heroes, maps, or things like that. That shit's all but extinct. That's not something that's been really frequent in the Overwatch ecosystem for a long time. And that's because they have been focusing so heavily on trying to deliver that PvE story mode talent tree experience. And now all of it's fucking worthless. It's all for nothing. All of the years they spent doing that instead of focusing on making Overwatch the multiplayer better has just been nothing to show for it. It's all been in vain. So it's just a real cherry on top of the shit cake. And understandably, a lot of people are disappointed here. There were a lot of people that probably got Overwatch 2 because they just wanted the PvE and story mode and the multiplayer was just a little bonus for them. And now that's not even coming, so what the fuck did they even bother with the title for? I've never quite seen something to this scale executed this poorly, where they market something that's, hey, PvE story mode, this is what makes Overwatch 2 a real sequel, not just a balance update we're doing to Overwatch. It's this real shiny new toy that you're all gonna love to play with. It's this PvE story mode. They've shown footage of it, they've made a lot of announcements about it, they've really pushed the idea that this is going to be worthy of being called a sequel to Overwatch because the PvE and story mode's doing so much heavy lifting and so much is going into it. It's real deep, it's real fun. Now, GameSpot did conduct an interview where they asked questions to try and get a little more clarity for the community. The big talking point is the direction that you're now taking with PvE, that you basically aren't doing it. Is that the correct way to characterize it? It's not happening anymore and you pivoted away from it. And Aaron Keller responds, I think I would characterize it slightly differently, which is we are doing a part of what the team had set out to do, but not the entirety of what was discussed back at BlizzCon 2019. So the real focus is on the story missions and that experience as opposed to the more open-ended hero mode and that stuff. Right, so it's fair to say that the experience that you showed during the first Overwatch 2 reveal is not going to be the one that will be released at any point. Yeah, exactly. So we're definitely not doing the hero mode and the talents and that power progression system. So you're basically doing absolutely fucking nothing of what was advertised over the course of the last 4 years. It's the most watered down bare bones version of a PvE component that they could tack on, at least from everything I'm seeing here. It looks like they're going to try and do like these small little story missions for some heroes where there is PvE to it, but it doesn't have the progression system, it doesn't have a talent tree. So it really just feels like you're almost just doing a custom game that Blizzard themselves is giving a stamp of approval to. Like you're just playing some fanfic that Blizzard's given the thumbs up for. This just isn't at all what anyone was expecting for Overwatch 2. This isn't what anyone was buying into for the hype of Overwatch 2. A story mission that they put out once every 6 months maybe, that tells the story of Widowmaker, the time she ate a sandwich at a Starbucks and then had to fight 5 droids on the way out. Like that's not interesting, and that's not worthy of this being called a sequel anymore. There was no reason for Overwatch 1 to have died. This next part's really interesting and a bit odd. There's a lot of honesty from Aaron here, so he mentioned something that I briefly touched on about how the actual PvP game felt neglected by most of the community. He says, we had a really large portion of our team working on the PvE side of the game, and I think players of our live running game could feel that because we eventually stopped making content for it. It's been maybe 2.5 years since the last hero that we launched, and we don't want to be back at that point where it's another 3.5 years since launching a PvP map. So he admits that they recognize the game quality was suffering in the PvP side of things because of all of the focus on PvE. He then goes on to say that they shifted strategy last year, and after shifting strategy, they focused entirely on the live game and pumped out Overwatch 2. Which I think is a little stinky because Overwatch 2 did not feel like this crazy big shift in priorities from the team. This felt like something that one of their departments could have been working on while they were still working on PvE. Again, Overwatch 2, as it launched, was just a big patch for Overwatch. And really, like, when you break it down to its bare bones here, if you really take its pants off, it was only a couple big changes, the biggest, of course, being reducing teams from 6 to 5. But that's not exactly something that takes a ton of resources to change, I don't think. Of course, I'm not a fucking developer. I could be very naive on how hard it is to take one number away from 6. Subtracting may be very difficult in the code of the game, but that was by far the biggest thing about Overwatch 2. Of course, they did have a couple new heroes that I'm sure they were working on for quite some time, but overall, it still wouldn't be enough to justify calling it a sequel. The sequel was still hinging entirely on the fact that it had this big new mode coming to it, and now it doesn't. But Aaron does go on to say that they are still planning on making story arc content, which is just the very, very stripped down version of what they had envisioned initially, which is the PvE component. So there's going to be story arcs. They said they're planning one for Season 6. There's no telling exactly what kind of cadence they're going to have with the release schedule of these story arcs. It could be pretty frequent, but I doubt it. I don't have faith in the team to make those kind of frequent updates with this PvE stuff. This feels like something they'll do like maybe once a season at best. And even still, that's lackluster content because it's nothing new. They're adding a bit of a story to it, but with no talent, there's no talent tree, no progression system, nothing like that. It feels like just a pure afterthought and something they're doing out of an obligation because of how they marketed Overwatch 2. Hats off to GameSpot for not being afraid to actually ask some decent questions here. So this next section, he's basically saying exactly what I did. So he's talking about how there's going to be a lot of frustration because they're basically giving a game, or they're not giving the game that they had advertised. You know, he says, we're in a situation now where this game is what it's always been. It's evolved in some ways, but a sequel was released, and that sequel's justification hinged on the PvE. Why did that happen? And without just reading verbatim the response here, you can absolutely go read the entire GameSpot article if you want more insight. I'm just going to try and sum it up the best I can. His response is basically saying, like, yes, the PvE won't be as we said it would, but we feel the game is very different from Overwatch 1 for a variety of reasons, and they keep patting themselves on the back for their roadmap, saying that this is the biggest thing they've ever done. Like, this kind of update for Season 6 is the largest in Overwatch history, and their roadmap illustrates their goal, like their mission, to make this feel like a real sequel that's different from Overwatch 1. But it's really not that impressive. Like, they're not doing anything here that other games aren't doing more of and better. Like, this roadmap is fine, I guess, but not as like justification for calling this a sequel when you stripped away what was supposed to be the main component of it. These aren't like incredible jaw-dropping updates, like innovations to the game or the formula. Adding a new map or two new maps isn't exactly going to have people charging into the streets, pumping their fists, celebrating, "Oorah," twirling their shirt over their head or anything. And adding one new hero like once a fucking year isn't that impressive either. But like I mentioned, the game doesn't have this kind of tender love and care, so I guess drip feeding any kind of content and attention to it is good. It's a step in the right direction, but it's coming on the back of stripping away the main component of the sequel, like the whole identity of it being a sequel. So it's just, I don't know, it doesn't seem to me like this justifies it being called Overwatch 2 anymore. And one other thing I find a bit laughable, even delusional, or maybe I am the one that's on stupid pills, but they really seem to put a lot of stock in the quality of their limited time events, or like their event modes. Like, they really seem to put a lot of faith in how much players are going to love their events. And they're fine. Like, I've played their events before. I've played a lot of Overwatch. The events are fine, but it's not like what would keep me coming back to the game just because you have like a goofy, silly event mode going on at the time. But they seem to really think that that's a huge accomplishment, that they have basically a fucking custom game that they'll pump up in a playlist every now and then. To me, it just feels very underwhelming and falls flat because, again, you have this sequel that was supposed to have a huge story mode PvE to it that's not there anymore, and now scrambling to try and justify why it's even still called Overwatch 2. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to talk about this a little bit because it's extremely disappointing to see this. I was looking forward to trying it out. I didn't really know what to expect going into it, but I was optimistic that it would at least be high quality and fun, and now it's just never coming out, at least not in the way that it was supposed to. Now it's just going to be watered down PvE stuff into Overwatch, so that's not very hype. But yeah, anyway, that's really about it. See ya.